Hello, everybody. I'm actually facilitating this session, so honest to God, they're not paying me enough for everything I'm doing here. Let me just, my OCD kicks in, and this is annoying me there. Okay, we're coming to a very hot topic at the moment, which is housing, which is top of the agenda in Ireland at the minute. Certainly ought to be if it isn't every day. The lack of, the expense of, etc., etc. We have an illustrious panel here. We have 4 people on stage, and we're also going to be joined by Ann Pettifor online. Is she there already? We will give her a wave if we can. Let's all go. Ann, like cheers. Norm. Ann, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I can hear you faintly. Say something more.
I am here.
I am here. I am here. Oh God, look at the size of leaf in the back. Jesus. Don't turn your back. Oh God, that's worse. Ann. Hey, Ann. Hello. We see you. Very welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Okay, so our panel from left to right, we have Dr. Rory Hearne, who's currently Associate Professor, Senior Lecturer in Social Policy in Maynooth. His most recent publication is the best-selling award-nominated book called Gaffs, Why No One Can Get a House and What We Can Do About It, which Fintan O'Toole described as clear, cogent and persuasive. Dr. Rory Hearne. Hugh, beside him is Hugh Brennan, who's a construction professional with 30 years experience working in Ireland, but he's also worked in South Africa and Haiti on humanitarian construction work with Irish NGOs. He's the co-founder and CEO of, how do you say that, Cualann?
Well done, spot
on. Cualann, which is an approved housing body delivering affordable housing here in Ireland. So welcome, Hugh. Rosie Lynch is sitting beside Hugh. She's creative director of Workhouse Union, which is a community co-design and creative placemaking organisation based in Cualann in County Kilkenny. She's a member of the team which is leading the 10-year Nimble Spaces / Inclusive Neighbourhood Community-led housing project in Cualann. So thank you for coming, Rosie. Beside Rosie is Barbara McCarthy, who's a journalist and researcher. She writes on environmental issues for Irish and global media. And Barbara's going to be discussing her findings from a focus group which took place in May this year on behalf of We All Ireland Hub. It's a project on housing and inequality. Thank you. And joining us online is Ann Pettifor, who is an author and director of PRIME, which stands for Policy Research in Macroeconomics. It's a network of economists that promotes Keynes's monetary theory and policies, and that focus on the role of the finance sector in the economy. So she'll be talking about finance and housing. So we're going to kick off. Rory, if you'd like to give us your take on the situation that we have at the moment. The question is, what steps are required to ensure that housing policy and financial flows support a well-being economy in Ireland?
Yeah, delighted to be here, and it's really great to, I suppose, put housing central to the discussions about a well-being economy and how we can have an ecologically sustainable well-being economy. And it's something that I've been engaging with in recent years. I wrote about it in my previous book to Gaffs called Housing Shock, which was about financialization of housing, but also within it, I kind of conceptually spoke about home in the context of our planetary home. And we need a home to live, but also we need our planetary home as well, and bringing those two together in terms of housing. And I also teach my students in Maynooth, social policy students, a course specifically on the just transition and how can we achieve that. And within Gaffs, I put quite a big section on how a human right to housing approach can substantially meet housing need, but also actually address our climate targets. But importantly, improve conditions and living standards for communities and parts of our society who do not and are not benefiting from the green transition. And I spoke about it as well in terms of the danger that if these communities do not benefit, that the transition itself is in jeopardy, as we can see with the rise in the far right politics and the anti-green agenda. And I think central to a well-being economy is home. You know, we need everyone needs a decent, standard, affordable home. And I think increasingly, you know, that needs to be an eco-sustainable home as well. And housing is fundamental as a need, just as health is, but yet we don't have a housing system that is built around meeting housing needs, just like we have a health system that actually does generally try to meet health needs. And why is that? And my analysis is that the housing system that we have developed is one that essentially is about promoting and taking the approach that the dominant way to provide housing is through the financialization of housing, which is essentially this market-driven, private speculative finance-driven approach to housing. The problem with this, from an ecological perspective and a human need perspective, is that the system is based on continued growth through rising asset values, through rising rents, rising house prices, and just as in capitalism generally, it is based on continued ever accumulation and economic, this idea of growth, but growth measured, as I said, through essentially asset appreciation and accumulation, not through meeting human need or ecological need. And we can see this kind of destructive approach in Ireland as a very good, unfortunate case study of what is the problem with the financialization of housing, both from a social need perspective and from an ecological perspective. What we've seen in the last decade is this massive building of offices, of apart hotels, of built-to-rent housing, none of which is meeting housing needs, yet we're seeing this huge absorption of resources into actually what was coined in the last session, this idea actually of a destructive industry. We have the situation whereby hundreds of thousands of homes are left vacant and derelict. We have the Airbnbification of housing. We have tourists in homes, and we have families homeless in hotels. I know I'm conscious of my time. I think the pity is that we see climate policy increasingly saying, you know, we need a just transition. Housing, the retrofitting of homes, the delivery of green, sustainable homes is central to that. But what we're not seeing is a meaningful implementation of that policy. And I think there's real potential for a definancialized approach that would meet housing needs and ecological needs through things like community affordable housing that could actually develop a positive path forward. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
It was easy for you to say. No, pass it over. Thank you, Rory. So, Hugh.
Thanks, Rory. And I agree with a lot of what Rory says there. We agree on most things. One or two tiny things we don't agree on, but I agree with most things. My father, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, used to say to me, "Enough is as good as a feast." Yeah. And I think that would be a good slogan for this whole movement. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the enemy here, and you're all going to dislike me at the end of this, because I'm going to pick a few holes in what I've heard so far, if you don't mind, okay? So, I'm going to pick a few holes even in the conference. The very first plenary session, I felt that Professor Eloy Laurent was speaking down to Professor Bayo, sorry, I can't pronounce his second name. Yeah, and obviously other people did as well. Like, what are we about if we're not listening to people? It's the global north speaking down again to the global south. I mean, we have to start listening to the people who are going to be seriously affected by this. And it's the very same in our country. It's the people who are suffering from the housing crisis that nobody is listening to. And we don't raise our voices highly enough. I know that there is a crisis. I know there is a lot of work trying to be done about it, but people aren't listening. I'm going to move on to the next session then, and that's when we had all of the representatives from the universities up here. I'm sorry, guys. I was looking at Animal Farm. I really was. 20 years ago, that was a row of men up there, professor this, doctor that, professor the other, and now it's just a row of women. I want to see equality here. I want to see all of those women here expressing their voices, but it came across as the institution speaking again. Where's Claire? Claire, you were saying, we're moving upriver. You've gone too far upriver. Nobody is jumping into the river where you are. Honestly, and I don't want to use the word elitism because it just reminds me of President Trump, but it is a privileged elite. So again, the universities have to start listening to people. I believe this, and I blame myself as well. I'm not being critical of everybody else, and all the fingers are pointing back at me as well, because I do tend to rant and rave a little bit. And then finally, I'm just going to come on to the housing issue, and I honestly think that the problem with the housing issue in Ireland is, as Rory said, that we have depended on the private sector to deliver social and affordable housing. I don't mind the private sector delivering the high-end stuff. They can do it all they want, and you can have your golden taps and whatever you want. I don't care. But if you have the private sector and big institutional funds coming in and paying for and selling social and affordable housing to the state and to bodies like the other approved housing bodies, they set the price. That's the problem. And the state said, yes, we agree with you. We validate the price that you're charging for these houses, and that's what pushes the price up. And that is, as they said in the last session, that is neoliberal policies. But we can't call it that anymore. And Paul was absolutely right. I mean, we're now in a situation where there is no ideology. This is the culture. Neoliberalism has become the culture, and we can't even say it anymore. We know that they've taken over the Conservatives. We know that the big think tanks in the UK have literally taken over the Conservative Party. But that's where we are, and that's where we have come. I'm going to pass on from that now because I'll only explode. Thank you.
Can I just say we're going to do something different at the end when everybody but Anne has spoken. We'll ask people to share a bit together, and then we're going to take some live questions, because I think there'll be some live questions about this. I've got some. Okay.
Thanks so much. Great to be here, and also just great to be on stage with Hugh and Rory and Barbara. And I suppose thanks so much, Hugh. I think you spoke a lot what I've been thinking throughout the day, and I'm sure what a lot of us in the room feel. I'm not an academic. I don't come from a think tank. I'm not a politician. I work on the ground at a neighborhood level. So a lot of, when I came even into today's conference, I don't understand the concept of degrowth and the academic language that a lot of you in the room are very comfortable with. But throughout the day, I've kind of found my way, and I've heard things that I resonate with. I was delighted that David Bollier spoke, because certainly the Commons is an area that I grew up with, I work in. So I think, again, what Hugh is speaking, that we need to find ways to discuss these things and find common space and common ground. And I suppose in the area of housing, I've been working in this kind of space of community-led housing, and I think Barbara's going to speak a little bit to that, about even what does that mean. I suppose community-led housing is this concept that communities can and will have the supports to come together to provide their housing need at a local level. And that doesn't sound very radical. It sounds, I suppose, communities have been doing it for centuries and millennia, but at the moment there definitely seems to be quite major blocks in people coming together at a local level to provide housing at a local need. And I suppose the perspective that I very much come through is looking through a disability perspective and a care perspective. And I think that we need to, within this wellbeing economy, that idea of relationality, of interdependence and of care needs to be at the kind of core of our wellbeing world and our wellbeing economy. But more importantly, we need to see the concept of interdependence and care at the center of housing. So I suppose that's, again, I'm throwing out loads of words that, might or might not land, But these are, we are at there, kind of alongside maybe the kind of ecological crisis that we are facing. We are also facing a care crisis, and we are facing a support, isolation, mental health crisis that I think all of us are very aware of. So community-led housing places, I suppose, some sort of a new model of housing at the moment, where people can really also bed into housing kind of different levels of mutual aid and support.
Can I ask you, just sorry, I don't know what community-led housing means. I don't know what you're describing. Is it a new thing?
I mean, it's a new and an old thing. Maybe many of you are kind of familiar with the idea of cooperative housing, which we have in Ireland a kind of a very rich history of cooperatives. So when you think of cooperative land use, our co-ops, our credit unions, I think when it comes to money and community assets, I work in a community development sphere, and on a day-to-day level, local communities are supported by government to come and provide community assets in common. So whether that's a community hall, a new biodiversity garden, the local GA pitch, they're all kind of things that we can imagine that we can come together to provide. When it comes to housing, because we are in such a, such a neoliberal concept of either individual financialized housing or social housing, which is state provided, that kind of commons in between, coming together to find a space between the kind of private and public ownership.
And have you done that?
Many of us are trying with the support of Hugh and many others, but there is massive policy blocks at the moment, and financial flows of money coming in, being blocked out of community-led housing.
Thanks. Okay. Right. Barbara?
Thank you. I put together a focus group on housing, which was sponsored by the Bush Foundation. If anybody's here today, thank you. Obviously, with the aim to tackle inequality in areas of housing, and I got about 9 or 10 people who comprise a mix of those who supported co-housing, advocacy group members, volunteers, and also somebody who's affected by the housing crisis. Somebody who's in the middle, who is paying taxes and isn't eligible for any kind of social housing, and then also is kind of caught in a rental trap, which is a lot of people in Ireland. So we spoke about co-housing, which is community-focused housing model, where residents intentionally come together to share spaces and resources and responsibilities. And the issues that came up in the group where we discussed rampant capitalism and individualism, and sort of a lack of innovation, again, stumbling blocks, policies, a lack of political will, and ultimately, and this is where I come into it as well, and as do a lot of people, a lack of knowledge about what co-housing actually is. A lot of people would think it's some kind of hippie colony or something, I don't know. So there was talk about models in Europe. Obviously, we have countries like Germany, Sweden, France. They have low rent dwellings. There's syndicated support there. Lots of funding for sustainability. In Holland, you have like kind of Alzheimer's, communities. Then there's, in Switzerland, you have local democracy, where things are done, planning and stuff are done locally. We discussed that, how Europe is so different, but how we can be inspired by what's happening, what's being done in Europe, and create a framework. Obviously, anyone who goes to Europe a lot will see that there's, everyone has personal liability, so you can have a lot more things happen in derelict spaces, and for communities to come together. So in Ireland, obviously, rampant capitalism was discussed. Policies adopted since the crash have all played into the hands of capitalists, and it's the system kind of suits individuals and oligarchs, often people who live offshore and who don't pay taxes in Ireland. We discussed neighbourhoods and how the burden of personal debt can be removed from people's shoulders through these kind of co-owned and co-secured communities, and we also had people from the north as well. So we discussed some kind of, networking between north and south of Ireland. We discussed a lot, obviously. I'm not aware how long 3 minutes is, by the way, but
You're about 2 minutes, 2 minutes in.
two more. Oh, I'm 2 minutes in. Okay, so then yes, impediments were discussed: grid connections, water connections, policy, access. And to affordable finance planning. I think the will of the people was discussed, and also how the long-term strategy, when you're looking in terms of immigration, how community-led housing can help cohesion, because if you don't have cohesion, then you will have potentially ghettos. It doesn't. You have to have, and this would be a really good way of integrating people that are coming to Ireland. It's the only way that really works, because if you don't have these community projects, and obviously a wealth tax would help. Then we have the recommendations, I suppose, a framework for co-housing that would work across Ireland. Retrofitting existing communities, where rather than try to create a new co-housing situation, you could, experiment with the community and see how that works. And also kind of state-run modular housing. We need to have kind of rapid neighborhoods and build these modular homes in factories and just kind of state-run and make it less, rethink the whole 2 up, 2 down that people are so familiar with in Ireland, because we have this obsession with home and ownership that you don't have across Europe, and put in policies to enable different approaches. Am I at 3 minutes yet? I don't want to, I know I'm the last
That
speaker.
ship has sailed a long time.
But anyway, so yes, obviously, we just want to empower local authorities to do more and have people kind of think differently, just change the way they think. Even when you think of the bottle deposit scheme, it's been in Europe for a long time, and now people are kind of getting used to it, and now the streets are getting cleaner and stuff. But you just have to be available for a new way of living, because it's niche, but we've seen with other situations like COVID how the power of scale, and just adopt eligibility criteria for housing, and yeah, I mean that's kind of pretty much what we were saying. We're just kind of asking, why is there no political will, and why is there, that's the final question we're going to leave it with, and what are the stumbling blocks to this, because we need solutions for housing in Ireland. So
Okay, brilliant. Thank you to everybody for speaking. We'll bring up Anne, if we can. We'll cross over to Anne, who's been, I hope, listening in and able to hear all that, to see what her take on that is. And also, can I say, please, people, be thinking about any questions you might like to ask in the room. You can ask them that way, or you can ask them in real time. And we want questions, not people giving 50 minutes of their thoughts. You know that one? I'm not going to keep you very long. There's Anne. Anne, hello. Have you been able to hear everything that was going on?
Can you hear me?
Well, we're going to work on that. Your volume's quite low at the moment. I'm just not sure why, but is it up now? Can you turn it up at your end?
How's that?
Getting better? Can you go any higher?
And how about that?
Yes, getting good. Any more you can give us. I'm half deaf, so. Okay.
This is as high as I could go.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Okay, so can you give us your thoughts?
Sure. So I want to begin by saying there is no shortage of housing in Ireland. There is no need to go on building and spreading more concrete across the small island of Ireland. There are enough residential places. There are enough homes for households. What there's a tremendous shortage of in Ireland and in Britain is affordable homes. That's the shortage. Now, why is this situation? And I think what I want to say here is that we've got to learn not to just think in utopian terms of that which we'd like to see happen without understanding why we're in this particular mess, this housing mess, not just in Ireland, but also in Britain and also in Europe, in New York, wherever you go in the world, there is a housing crisis. And the reason for it is simple, it's straightforward, really. It is that we've deregulated the international financial system. In other words, we've allowed Wall Street, if you like, to have free reign around the world. We've privatized our pensions, and Wall Street has sucked up enormous amounts, $217 trillion worth of the world's savings. And these institutions in the shadow, it's called the shadow banking sector, they're not in the everyday banking sector where we live, are floating around the world, if you like, and looking for assets into which to invest their trillions of dollars in order to make capital gains. And property just happens to be one of the best assets for that kind of investment, right? And if we're going to talk about housing in terms of what we can do here, if you like, at the micro level, with our efforts here and our very admirable efforts at community house building, kind of cooperatives and so on and so on, we are missing the big and the real picture, because for as long as we have a deregulated, globalized financial sector that managing $217 trillion of savings and using that money, that wall of money aimed at, if you like, the finite asset that is land or property. There's only so much land in Ireland. I don't quite know where that land is in or on. There's only so much land on the island of Ireland, really. And when you aim trillions of dollars at that finite asset, you of course inflate the price. And until we change the system so that doesn't happen, but that we have, if you like, domestic and autonomous financing for our housing, as long as we're part of a globalized system, there is no hope of having sufficient affordable homes for the people of Ireland and indeed for the people of Britain. So I want us to look at that big picture, because I listened to the debate about growth and degrowth. And in fact, I can't bear the terms, because I believe it's simply reinforcing the frame, the neoliberal frame that you refer to, of growth. And we've got to get away from that. And the reason we're doing that is that back in 1961, we used to, with Keynes, for example, we would calculate the level of economic activity in an economy. Were prices too high? Were they too low? Was unemployment too high? Was it too low? Was output too high or too low? And the key thing that economists had to do was to balance all of this out, right, in order to have stability of the economy. And then what happens in 1961 is the OECD, led by a British economist called Sam Britton on the Financial Times in London, recommends that we shouldn't be just measuring levels any longer. We should be proposing growth. And by growth, they mean exponential expansion of activity, of economic activity. And they did that because there was exponential growth in the financial system. Now, if you've got money, a load of money, you can speculate on it and you can make a load more money. And we all know that happens. So hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're looking for ways in which to gamble and increase the return on those dollars. If you invested into a project, a sound project of sustainable housing, for example, it takes labor, it takes land, and it takes time for you to gather returns from that. Much better to take your money and aim it at a finite asset like London property, like Dublin property, and inflate the value of that asset and then collect the gains from that. And that is what's happening in the global financial system. Now, that's because we've allowed money and the financial system to run amok, if you like. And then Ireland makes it 10 times worse by becoming effectively a tax haven. And so that attracts a lot of this Wall Street money, essentially. And that makes conditions worse for people trying to find a home in Ireland. Now, if we're going to have those arrangements, then we ought to be tackling precisely those arrangements which are preventing us from providing the people of Ireland with decent, affordable homes, roofs over their heads, young people as well as older people, families as well as individuals. And that's not possible to do in a world of globalized finance. And until we understand that, until we lift our eyes, if you like, away from the micro, from what's going on here on the ground at home, the place we know, the infinite, to what's going on out there, we're not going to be able to achieve decent housing for the citizens of Ireland. There's a wonderful philosopher, Ian McGilchrist, and he talks about the Western mind having two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is the sphere that, like a bird looking for a seed in the middle of some grains of sand, has got to be very precise and look very narrowly at that grain of seed. At the same time, the bird has to be aware of potential predators and uses the right hemisphere of the brain to discover where the predators are. And for me, too much of the discussion about housing is on here, the micro level, which is tangible, that which we can see, that which our neighbours can see, and not enough on using the right brain on the global context. And until we change that, until Ireland changes its laws on, for example, tax evasion, Ireland distorts the whole of the European economy with her laws on taxation, because it attracts every big pharmaceutical company in the world, every big Amazon, all of the Silicon Valley guys are all posting their profits in Ireland in order to avoid taxes in places like the United States or in Europe, right? Mm. That's distorting numbers across the world. Ireland can change that. The people of Ireland could change that. People of Ireland could argue we do not want to be a tax haven. We do not want to be the place where big money comes in and inflates prices. We want to be a different kind of country. But that's not in the discussion. The discussion is, what are we going to do at this very micro level about housing? I'm sorry if that sounds brutal, but I feel brutal.
Yes, Anne, you've just depressed the hell out of everybody here. But thank you.
We can't change anything unless we know what's going on, unless we understand what's happening.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah. Knowledge is power.
Right. Well, we're going to have a revolution at 5:30. If you can hang on till 5:30, we're going to have a global revolution. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask the people in the room, we've heard some very interesting, provocative chats. We came here to provoke, and a lot of it has been provocative. So I think you all were happy enough to see if anybody here has something they want to ask. Here's a man over here. Would you like to stand up? And have you got a microphone? Oh, yes. Have we got a separate microphone? No, we've got one. Oh, yeah, there's one behind you there. Sorry, that man behind you. Right, we can keep this one here. Somebody can keep
Hello?
Yes, hold it right up.
We've heard a lot about people trapped in a system and talking about transformation and feeling they're not able to. We've also heard about people who are doing bottom-up stuff, but you have to wonder, I mean, I take the last speaker's point, if there's this massive thing that's oppressing us, however much you try and do little things to make yourselves feel better, even though it's very worthy, it's not going to get us to deal with them. That's the upriver argument, isn't it, that we heard earlier.
Yeah. Have you
so
a question
what on earth
for
to
one of the
do?
panel? Have you a question for?
No, that's what I'm saying is, if that's a correct description, what's the panel think we should be doing with that dilemma?
Yeah, well, yes. How do you respond to what Anne said? I don't think it's mutually exclusive, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Do you want to just go? Anybody who wants to choose, champion at the back.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and one that we grapple with every day when I've been trying to change the system for 25 years now. Both at structural, macro level and micro community level. And I think that that's the answer, actually. You have to try and do both and it all. You have to try and change it at a micro level. You have to start the changes. You have to be the changes. And you have to challenge the structures as well. And
are enough people in Ireland comfortably enough off that they don't want to challenge the good job? You know, there's obviously enough. There's a quantum amount of people here who are doing okay. When does it all eat itself? That's what I want. When does the whole system become unsustainable? You could argue it is now, but it's clearly not so bad.
I would think, no, the system is already unsustainable. And we know that ecologically it's unsustainable. We look at the levels of inequality in Ireland and globally, it's socially unsustainable. The question is how it changes and what forms does it change to? And that is what politics is about. That's what campaigning is about. That is
But
what...
if the people who are in the positions of making policy can live comfortably behind their electronic gates, it's not going to hit home to them. So these things are happening in the gut, don't they? The visceral things where you haven't got enough, or you've whatever it is.
Yeah, but I would
do we
challenge
need new
that
politicians, or do we need?
Oh, we absolutely need new politicians. Yeah.
Who's going to stand for? Who's going to stand for election in this room? Yeah.
I did recently.
Oh, you did? How did you do?
Nah, I did all right. Yeah.
Are you a councillor?
The plan is to do better next time.
Fail and fail better. Yeah, so you're saying you're aware of the situation, you're aware of the problem, and it needs the two-pronged approach. Hugh, what's your...
Well,
you're going to rant about Anne,
I agree fully with Anne, and that whole global financial scene, if you like, that obviously is impacting us, and that's what I was talking about earlier. That the institutional funds who are here and who can afford to buy up properties, and then to have them leased out as social or now probably affordable homes as well. That's not the way to do it. So to answer your question, the way to do it is don't rely on the market. We rely on the market all the time to price our properties. Like, what's affordable housing in Ireland here now, according to the government? It's market less a certain amount. That's a nonsense in my view. I think the way you do it is you start the other side. You look at the costs. What does it cost to build a house, okay? And then there's a margin on top of that, and you ignore the market. Now, obviously, you can't ignore the market in terms of the price of materials or the price of labour. But what you are ignoring is the open market value of the property. Now, people will say to you, well, if you do that, and if that's how you're valuing your houses, you're going to have negative equity in a very short period of time. You're not. The demand is still there. It's the demand that pushes up the price. So if for example, we're building now, and we're selling homes for 260,000, that doesn't mean that that's the market value of that house, because the market value of the other houses in the area will be around 350,000 or 360,000. So therefore, it doesn't affect the value of the houses in the other area. Now, there's probably economists out here who tell me that I'm speaking nonsense, but that's all right. But that's the way I look at it. So you can do it from a cost plus basis. Now, the government will also tell you, well, we can't afford to pay for this. I mean, the Minister for Finance said recently that whatever the number of houses that we said we have to build in a year, let's say it's 50,000, he's saying that 80% of the finance for that needs to come from abroad. For me, that's a nonsense. Because, okay, if you're building your social homes, the state should pay for that and can borrow at very good interest rates still from the European Bank, isn't that right? So that money is affordable, but the affordable housing, that generates income for the state. Why? Because it's ordinary people who are working, who are buying the houses. They're going out to get their mortgages, and as soon as the mortgage comes in, the construction finance is paid back to the state, if the state is providing the construction finance. But not only that, every house that's sold is 13.5% VAT. There is all of the other taxes that are gathered up from the workers who are working there, from right the way down from the design team through the operatives to everybody. It is estimated that at least 40% of the cost of every house in the country goes back to the state. So I don't accept that the state can't afford it. What I do accept is that the state doesn't want to do it this way. What the state wants to do is to do exactly what Anne is saying they are doing, and that is to depend on the market. And again, these are neoliberal policies. We don't call them that anymore, as I said, because it's the culture. And that's what states have been doing all over the Western world. But it should change, and it can change, and there is a solution.
Well, Anne had her hand up. Anne, sorry, you were champing at the bit there.
I want to say this, that, we might think the system is complicated and that it's going to be very hard to change it. But I just want to assure you that it is being changed as we speak. And it is being changed by the far right. The far right is anti-globalization. The far right is nationalistic. The far right is protectionist. That's Trump. That's what's happening in Europe. That's what will happen at some point here in Britain. So we have to understand that there are forces against financial globalization, but they're not the progressive forces. They're not left forces. The left forces, so-called social democratic centrism, have accommodated the global financial system and live with it and say, oh, well, you know, I've got very well off as a result of it. But the far right and the right are very clear. They're anti-globalization. They want to change the system completely. They want to put up the barriers. They want to put up the protection. And we are just sitting here quietly thinking about how to fiddle with the system. I really think we must understand that the system is being changed as we speak. But
thank you for that. No, Rosie, did you want to say something? I'm just wondering how you feel, what do you see on the ground in Ireland, given there is a certain amount of right-wing activity here, certainly around housing. What do people what do ordinary people, to use that phrase, what do they say about this?
No, and thanks, Anne. I mean, I absolutely agree that the kind of the macro level of kind of financialization has to, is going to be a block to kind of a housing for all, or a kind of a well-being economy in housing in Ireland. I can't deal at that level, so I suppose I am dealing and with others at a macro level, and I think there has to be some kind of conversation between people going out and trying to create these new paradigms of housing in Ireland. Davy is doing it in Clough-Jordan. Clough-Jordan is a new model of housing that has been there for now 15 years, and we're even trying to bring in kind of a social inclusion concept now into that idea of community-led housing. And I suppose that is exactly that, the sort of the structures that the far right are trying to change, or how that is maybe taking hold in rural Ireland, is exactly why I think it's so important that we do this work and we place the kind of level of housing need at a community and neighbourhood level. So I think more than ever, it is important that the government focuses on that sense of placing housing back into the space of belonging and out of the space of financialisation. So for those very reasons, I think macro examples and kind of pilots have to happen.
Is it anybody? Yeah. Will we take one? Anybody got one? Well, Peter, you're running the show. You can't ask. Is there anybody normal would like to ask a question? Not that you're not normal, but right. Right. There's a woman over here. How long? We're on. Run.
Thanks so much. I'm very sorry. This is a real pain in the arse. I'm just going to make one comment. It's not a question. Hugh, I really appreciated that you advocated for compassionate listening. I think that that's very wise, and I think that's what we need in the left movement. But I did think that you were a bit unfair and lacked gentleness when you said that academics were elite. I was sitting next to a PhD student who's struggling through the housing crisis. I live with PhD students who earn nothing. And look, you may get to a point where you're a professor and you're earning over 100 grand a year, but you go through decades of debt to get there. So please be gentle. The definition for what elitism is has changed, and that is one of the tools that the far right is using. They are calling academics elites. Academics are in the crap with everyone else. Thanks.
And I accept that fully. Okay, I think my point, which is probably very, very badly made, was what I felt was the perception about what I was looking at. I mean, I know, and I don't want to make a cliche out of that. We all know academics. I mean, I have one here beside me as well, who are very fond of. But what I'm saying is that, yeah, what I'm saying is that that there is a perception, and I don't think that is a completely false perception, that it is a privileged elite who do manage to get all the way up to that level, and the titles, and maybe it's just me, and it's a mental block that I have. I mean, I would much prefer looking at that panel if I was listening to what Jenny was saying rather than listening to what Professor Jenny was saying. And I know that we're in, you know, the academic world, and this is academia, and that's just the way it's done. But I honestly feel that places a barrier between people at the top in the academic world and everybody else. And you know, maybe it's a chip on my shoulder, I don't know, but that's just a perception.
Did you go to university?
But I do apologize to other academics. You know, I didn't mean to demean you know, PhD students.
Let's move on.
Yeah, okay, we'll move on from that. Right, we've got one last question down at the back. I think that woman down there, sorry. You should have been down the back wearing turquoise.
Hi, thanks. Thanks to all the panelists, and actually I really appreciate the acknowledgement of empathy and passion in this group, and both the global and the national and local conversation. I'm really interested to hear from the panel and to go back to the question that was framed in the panel around what steps are required. So I wanted to originally ask a question about the political ambition in Ireland around housing and why is it so lacking? And I do understand that our investment policies are fundamentally undermining where we need to go in terms of addressing our housing crisis. So I'd love to hear from the panelists, like, what, if you could say one thing we should stop doing and one thing we should start doing, I'd love to hear what that is.
Okay, we've got very short time, 2 minutes. You did a lot of research, Barbara. Do you have strong feelings on this? It's okay if you don't.
I'm not really a housing
Okay, are you happy for someone? Happy for someone else to come on? Don't be shy.
Very briefly, I think that in terms of finance, you know, why have we taken this path? And I've, you know, analysed it inside out, and it does go back to the way we responded to the first phase of financialisation in the Celtic Tiger, and essentially post 2012, our government turned to international financial capital in housing as the key way to kind of both recover the property market, but also then, as we went on from 2013, 2014 onwards, needing this new supply, the government decided that rather than the state finding ways that are outside what Anne spoke about, what Hugh spoke about, financial ways to provide finance for housing that would be less financialized in the sense of actually financing affordable housing, they essentially turned to the international real estate funds, institutional investors, and they put all their eggs in that basket. They're going to provide our housing. They're going to buy all our housing off NAMA. They will sort us out. And we see the future, which we're told young people want to rent. They'll rent the buy-to-lets. They'll rent or they build to rents. And they had this completely, I argue they were captured by institutional investors. One of the big measures that institutional investors got was this thing called the Real Estate Investment Trust tax break, which was brought in 2013. I think that should be abolished. I think they should be taxed to the hilt in terms of, because one thing I would disagree with, Anne, is that I think that housing, not I disagree, but I agree with the frame, but I think we can do things, and maybe this is what you are saying, at a national level that can stop the way finance is entering our housing system through really high taxation on investment in our housing, and also requiring affordability. So if you have a development like they do in Vienna, 60% of it has to be affordable housing. That would stop the build to rent institutional investors tomorrow, you know, and I think that there are things we could do that would increase affordable housing and stop the speculative.
I think that's a very positive note. 1 quick minute.
Yeah, just the one thing I would do, in line with what Rory is saying, is to fund and build more affordable housing. Why? In the last session, somebody said that median income is a good measure. I don't think so. Maybe median disposable income is a good measure. So if you look at, just to take one of our developments in Ballymun, 60% of the people there were renting before they came to us, and the average rent, just from memory now, was around €1,680 per month. When they moved in, their mortgage was €980 per month. That's a huge lump of disposable income that that family has to spend on just the ordinary family things. That's honestly what will make the difference in society. Community-led housing is a major amount of housing in many European countries. I think in Vienna, Helsinki, Denmark, parts of Sweden, it's up at 40%. There's no means at the moment to build community-led housing in Ireland. That's what Rosie is involved on, that's what we're involved in, Davy, a lot of people are involved in. You can't get that. I would ask them to set up a one-stop shop. It's mentioned in the Act. The first page of the Act, they mention community-led housing and community land trust. But you go and you try to get funding for it, or you try to get some information on it, you cannot. They need to set up a one-stop shop. I would have said in the housing agency it's the sensible place to do it, so that local people can come together. People who want to provide their own housing can come together and they have a place to go, and that you can have community-led housing.
Thank you. And we'll thank you very much. And we'll just give, I think, the last word maybe. Sorry, Rosie, are you busting to say something? No. Okay, Anne, you're on screen. We're going to give you the last word. If you can sum up in 1 minute, what should be done and what should be stopped?
Thank you very much for putting up with my tearful analysis. I think there's just one thing that I would like to see us do, and that is to acknowledge that the Irish state has outsourced government of the economy to markets. This is what we did in the 1930s. Markets determined whether or not people had jobs, whether they had housing, whether they had income. And people revolted against government by markets. And they revolted in a way that was very, very unpleasant and ultimately catastrophic. So the first thing we have to ask is for our governments to govern, for our governments to take control of things in order to serve the citizens of Dublin, of Ireland. And until we do that, until our governments decide that they are going to govern and not leave it to markets and global markets at that, there is very little hope.
And can I just finish on saying, is that a very subtle product placement on your shelf behind you? Is it on sale in non-chain bookshops as we speak? Thank you so much. That has been a lively panel. Oh, what, Barbara, have you got one last?
Yeah, I always find whenever people talk about a far right, I think there's a huge disconnect between governments across Europe. I was over in Germany there just now, and people are so disillusioned with the Green, Links-Grüne Ampel coalition, because they just feel they're not connecting with the people at all. Do you know what I mean? And they are voting for AfD in protest, hoping that they will see that they're, that they will do something, just in protest.
It's a bit of a risky strategy.
Yeah, but that's how bad it is.
Put in the facts,
Economically and, in terms of housing, there's a lot of kind of things that are happening. But it's kind of in Europe as well. I think there's a bit of a disconnect, and as well with housing, and and once kind of the government is going, okay, we see you, we hear you, that's what we need.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Okay, we're going to wrap up that. Can we say thank you to our panelists for this session? You can walk off if you like. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anne.